Throwing the podcast where we want to be the very best, like everyone everywhere.
Oh my
I am
lord.
Club Kyle, and I am joined today by the Pokemon Master in the making, Jacob. How are you doing?
Oh, well, I doubt Pokemon Master, but I'm doing quite fine. Pokédex.
Well, you're better
Uh,
than Ash. You're better than Ash. Let's put it that way.
oh, anybody's better than Ash. That's the one thing that anybody can be better
Yep.
is Ash.
And
There are far more trainers out there that's more deserving of going to time and space than Ash himself.
which, if you guys can't tell what we're talking about, today our topic is the Pokemon games. Now, I want to make the stipulation early on. We're talking about the games mainly because I feel like the anime is its own entity with its own set of rules. Case in point, when Ash broke the rules of ground types.
Plus, additionally, with that one, considering on how long the anime has been running and how many episodes, seasons, stuff like that, that could probably be even put into a two-parter or an extendedly long,
That would be a series, I think,
uh,
because we would have to talk about it season
probably
by season.
series.
We would have to talk about it season by season. But anyways, Pokemon the games they've been out for a while. The first game, Red and Green, were released in 1996 for the Game Boy.
And on top of that, to give that a coverage or a more definitive of how long that's been, so that way a lot of people don't want to do the math. Currently, as of this year, it is now 25 years old, making it one of the many largest and longest running game series that have been around
Oh, it's definitely made its
for
impact.
years.
It's definitely made its impact.
Oh,
And looking at Sword and
make
Shield, like it's so amazing to see like the freaking progress the games have made. But I'm curious, have you actually played the original Game Boy versions of Red and Leaf?
so I actually have. I haven't. I didn't play Leaf. I played Green or no. I played Blue and Red because
Yeah,
they
Blue
came
and
out
Red.
on
That's right.
virtual consoles, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't think it's gonna be hard for me to find anywhere around, out there without spending a buttload of money to
Mm-hmm.
get the original copies. I'll just get, pay the $10 and give them a shot because by this point,
Mm-hmm.
this was back in 2016, 2017. I had played many of the games, a lot of the newer ones though,
Yeah.
and just now, like they just released on there. I'm like, oh, this is a neat gimmick for them to do. Granted, it's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
really good business strategy, but I'm
Yeah.
glad that they're doing it regardless because, being able to play the Red and Blue series on a 3DS felt really, really well, really,
Yeah.
really good, and I felt the same roughly the same nostalgia as many others who have played it, on the
Well, minus
original
20
Game
years.
Boy and
Minus
well,
20
minus
years.
20
Yeah, I was
years.
gonna say because nostalgia does tie into old memories. These are more recent, albeit still valid. My the furthest game I've ever played has been Emerald. Now I have played Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but that's not the same as Gold and Silver. So the furthest back I played is Emerald. So I'm not the biggest expert, but I guess to start off, what was your favorite Pokemon generation? Just in general, like just
So I have, I've put so many hours into each generation except for the first ever remakes of of Red and Blue and Yellow. I
Fire
haven't
Red and
gotten a
Leaf
chance to
Green.
play those. They're on my playlist. I want to
Yeah.
explore the Sevi Islands,
Mm-hmm.
but um, that aside, I'd still say to this day, the one true game that has really captivated me that wasn't a remake, alright, that I love the most, and this is because of the lore, and I know damn well this is controversial in so many ways, and in so many parts of the community. I have to say Gen 5 has been my favorite so far. It was the first game that I ever got on, that I actually owned, because after so many years of not owning one, because I got this back when I was like 11 or 12,
Mm-hmm.
and beforehand, the last time I ever owned a Pokemon game that
Mm-hmm.
was mine was back when I was like 6, 7, or 8, and that was Pokemon Emerald until I lent to someone, and well, I
Yeah,
never got it back.
yeah,
Um,
but
so I got it around the time that
for clarification,
the first game just came out.
Black and White is Gen 5 for anyone who didn't know. So just for that clarification.
Oh yes, very much.
Yeah, but
Gen 5 was a short generation.
I mean, short in relativity, it did have a sequel game, which is the only Pokemon game to actually have a direct sequel other than Gold and Silver. Uh, Not that the other games aren't sequels, but I always view them as their own separate entities. Black and White 2 was actually a follow up to the events of Black and White, and Gold and Silver is the only other game in the series that, in my opinion, has come close to not just being a redone or a remake. Emerald, Platinum, Ultra Sun, and Ultra Moon, uh, even Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee are all just remakes with different touches. Those two are the only actual sequels in the game, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. I never played the first generation. I have seen it though. Like I've seen people play like the remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green. So I have some basic opinions about it. But why don't we start in chronological order? What did you think of Generation One?
Well, first, I'd have to say I want to say real quick that is actually surprising. That we're on this discussion about Pokemon yet haven't played the originals, which is surprising. But
the
original, the original. But
yeah.
Here's my opinion on terms of the so being biased aside, all right. Gen 1, as I've played, through those games, I'd have to say the region itself, like the world, the more open world and RPG aspect of it is very, kind of throwing at you right there. Like, it's pretty good in terms of their open world aspect. It's to make you feel like you could just explore every nook and cranny that you can get. However, that comes with a downside in terms of how they did it. Granted, this is their first game, so
and also,
give them...
well, I mean, you gotta remember also, not only was it their first game, but they were also limited to the technology of the era. You can only go so far with the technology present.
That is true. They were very limited in terms of what they could do,
Yeah.
and which is why I said I'll give them a slight pass on this one. It definitely, I can say, for Gen 1, it definitely is a very nostalgic game to even go back to.
For many fans.
For many fans, old or new, considering you get to play with technology that's been around for years and have developed for many years on end to many different systems, and you finally get to enjoy what was, the starting point for the entire series. However, in terms of this, in terms of the overall aspect to it, there are a few things that I find very, very lacking about that entire region, and it's especially more prevalent. It's more like you see it more in the Let's Go games, or the mainly the Let's Go games, or even the after part of Pokemon Soul Silver and Heart Gold, is that the Pokemon variants there were it felt
limited.
It's very limited.
Well,
and I can understand that because it's their first game.
It's their first game, and keep in mind we're viewing this with the lens of hindsight. This was back when special attacks and physical attacks were not really a differentiating factor, and on top of that, this was back when Dragon types were stupid OP. Dragonite was one of the most powerful Pokemon in back then. Like, it was arguably, other than Mewtwo, so I feel like that's more just a reflection of the time and showing how far we've come, as opposed to it's good to always see where we came from. That's my opinion on it. I will say about Gen 1, though, it had the best rival. in my opinion, this is clearly subjective. I think Blue, he's just like this asshole kid, and I think that works it well with the narrative of the game. And also, having
Well,
him be the champion, I think, is a final good touch. Your first battle becomes your final challenge.
I do like that aspect, but I don't think he's more than just an asshole. He he's snobby. He's up. He's uptight. He's stuck up. He thinks he's better than everybody. But here's the thing about uh Blue though, that I watched the video a little bit ago going over a very long evaluation over each and every Pokemon games, which I won't lie was enjoyable, but the it's something that the guys talked about Blue stuck out to me, and I never really acknowledged this until he pointed it out. Was that whenever you go through each and every rival trainer battle that he has with you, he kind of does it in a way of he's not really wanting to think he's better than you, at least in the games aspect. He's more of trying to test and see if you're going to be ready to see what's going to be happening up ahead, because he's already done it. And
Yeah,
I like that about that. That is a really good rival.
that is
Yeah,
it's a good rival. He is always a good measuring stone. And also, I do like the aspect that he was the first Pokemon train. He was canonically in like the series. He is the first trainer you ever fight in the games. Uh, he is the first, and it makes sense that in this game he's the last person you fight in terms of the champion. He's the last goal to becoming champion. I feel like that's a good aspect. It also ties into the fact that he's always one step ahead of you. But once there are no more steps to go and you finally caught up, he has nowhere to go. And I will say he's probably one of the more memorable rivals. Not knocking the other ones, but Gen 2's rival, Gold and Silver, I remember the design, but I never remembered his name, nor do I. The only thing I remember about him was that he was the. Spoilers. Oh, spoilers, by the way. It's a Pokemon game. I don't think I need to say that, but spoilers. He was the son of Giovanni. That's the only thing I remember, but that wasn't even present in the game. It was more a thing they did behind the scenes. Uh, in terms of Generation 3, Brendan was never really a rival, nor was Wally. They just seemed more like friends and people who you fought but never you bettered yourself with. Barry was kind of like that in Generation 4, but he never really pushed further. He always just seemed more energetic. In Generation 5, you had your two childhood friends, and while one of them served as the rival, they weren't that memorable. And then in X and Y, you had the opposite gender of you, which is the only reason why I even remember them. And I barely remember the motivations. Sun and Moon had Hal, and we'll get to him.
Oh,
We'll
how
get
is a
to we'll get to
completely
him.
different subject?
We will get to him. But in the meantime, after that, Pokemon. It wasn't until Sword and Shield that I actually found a rival I enjoyed fighting in with Marnie and Beatty. I still don't know how to say that guy's name.
That I think it's pronounced beat, but
Beat.
I will agree with that. But
We'll
I
get to
will.
them.
I'll cover that one.
We'll
on
cover-
a later note later
yeah.
in this podcast.
Yeah, but with that said, though, I think Generation 1 was a good stepping stone for the series, and then we get to Johto, which has a
Hold
lot
on.
of...
There. Oh, if I may, there is one thing I'd like to note.
Okay, sure.
One last flaw. That Gen 1, it still has this one flaw, even noticeable in the generation, late post-game in Generation 4 and the Let's Go games. I personally think the geographical landscape of Kanto is relatively bland in later games. Like, I could accept it with the first, generation game, but going through the routes of Kanto and say Let's Go, or the post game of the Soul Silver and Heart Gold,
Mhm.
I feel was just not as exciting. There wasn't anything new. Everything is kind of the same from route to route, and that's one of the things
Yeah.
that I think that Kanto as a region itself very, very
But-
much had a big flaw in.
Well, with that being said, though, Kanto has ingrained itself into the minds of the fan base. Like, when people are asked
Oh,
what their
hands
favorite
down.
region is, Kanto is one of the contenders. Like, say what you will about the other regions, and there is a plenty to say for both appeal aesthetically as well as other visuals. But Kanto has stuck with people, and that does go with its gym leaders, who are very memorable for the most part. But there we get into
That and
Generation
their
Two. That in there, go ahead.
that and even like a lot of the dark aspects that Gen 1 also has was also very well done, I'd say. Like as an example, going through the Lavender Town, and going to the
The
funeral
Ghost
tower,
Tower.
and
The
having to
Ghost Tower, yeah.
fight the ghost tower, and having to fight the essential spirit of a dead Cubone's mother, and some of the trainers even
Oh,
talking about
shit.
pretty much beating people up.
We
There was a
forgot.
lot of dark themes in that game,
Oh, there were,
and
but that's when Pokemon, that was due to the times, and it's gotten lighter since then. But we forgot to mention something about the first generation that I glossed over, and honestly is a big point of contention of Generation Two, Team Rocket,
oh
aka
yes, Team Rocket.
the mob of the Pokemon world.
We can't
They're
continue without talking about Team Rocket.
okay. My views on Team Rocket are they're fun. They're iconic villains. The only memorable member, though, is Giovanni. The grunts are kind of pathetic.
I I can agree with that to some sense. It's definitely, I can agree that that their entire team is definitely a um more iconic and memorable team.
Yeah,
The way
which
they want to run things are
yeah.
really interesting, but the only person that really does outshine, the entirety is Giovanni
Who
himself.
actually I like.
Though
I
I
do.
personally think, real quick, the what happens after you beat Giovanni in the game, like as a gym leader, I just kind of feel that the way they did it was a tad bit bland.
I mean, it's the drawback of a silent protagonist. They act like you're important, but there is no character to the silent protagonist other than the personality you give them in your head.
Well,
So the
it's not
problem,
some.
that problem, I
Well,
think
that
is. Go ahead. Go ahead.
well, okay, that's the issue with that is wasn't so much that there was a silenced protagonist. You go through the game and you fight him. And he's talking about taking over the region, and then you beat him, and he's like, "Well, you beat my gym. I'm just gonna retire and go and study Pokemon." I just feel like that was a bit kind of
Yeah,
like it felt too
yeah.
quick of an end. I feel like there could have been a little bit done more. I mean, maybe
I
not in the first
I
games,
will
but
say
maybe in the later games
we
could have been done, like in
we're
Let's Go.
okay. So I'm gonna say right now that in terms of the anime, we're not gonna talk too much, but this was expanded upon in Pokemon Origins. In that version, when Red fights Giovanni, not only does he have a personality, but the way Red acts reminds Giovanni of himself, creating a tie between them. So I feel like that problem was rectified there. But speaking of rockets, Generation 2.
Oh my
Johto, okay. Johto, I think is like the. Johto is really based in Japanese, you know, myth and iconography. It's clear with many of the characters and set pieces of the game. There's a
Like for example,
lot,
the runes of Alph, as an example.
or I was thinking more of those dancers.
Ooh, yeah, the dancers too.
Hmm.
The
I can't remember what they're called.
they're. I don't think they really had a name. I think
They
they were
had a
just
name.
called the Komodo Girls.
The Komodo, that's fine, but like, yeah. There is a lot going for Johto and a lot going against it. Points in favor in my book are, at least in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, I enjoyed walking with Pokemon. I really enjoyed that. That was a fun aspect. It was the only game where I actually didn't want to use the bike that much. That should tell you something.
Oh, I can agree with that.
Also,
That Go ahead.
I think that the ending of Generation 2, it's not technically post game because it still feels like part of the story, is a great follow up to the previous game, having the character you played in the first game be your final challenge. It's a shame that the Pokemon games never continue this trend, but I understand why they never did, because it would have been impossible after a while to keep going with it.
Mm-hmm.
Red being the final boss of the game is a great moment, especially when you realize that you were this person and now the greatest obstacle to overcome is yourself. Also points in favor, I will say again, the landscape is nice.
The landscape is nice.
And
However, there is one issue with that landscape, at least in Gen 2, and it's still a little bit noticeable in Gen 4. They improved upon it in Gen 4, but the issue with it is that it's because it's countered, it's right next to Kanto. A lot of players going into that, it just the entire landscape just seemed a lot similar to Kanto, and it made the landscape just feel bland. They improved upon it in the Gen 4 remakes of Gold and Silver, which I appreciate those because those places were a bit more memorable than,
well,
say,
the
going
technology had
through
improved
Gen.
again. It seems like a
Well,
bunch of your bigger problems with the aesthetics of the games is that the technology isn't just up to what we're used to. And
well,
while like, go ahead.
it there that is true, but it's also not true because there's one other thing that also made that in the original games an issue: new Pokemon. And what I mean by that is a lot of the newer Pokemon you could have gotten, you barely got them in the game, and most of them were available in post game. A lot of the Pokemon you had in early on the beginning of the games were pretty much Kanto Pokemon. And say like Larvitar as a new Pokemon being added, you couldn't get him until post game. He was not available. And
Yeah.
that's another thing that I felt that
Which
Johto lacked was diversity in Pokemon.
which I'm gonna say, as bad as some of the other games that I like in the series that I actually don't like are, I at the very least remember some of the Pokemon that they added. Here, though,
Oh,
actually, there are some Pokemon I remember from Gen 2. There are plenty, actually, if I'm thinking about it. Togepi, and vice versa. It's first evolution, uh, Espeon and Umbreon, and of course the starters.
of
Wobbuffet's
course, the
always a
starters.
classic, but if I'm going to be honest, outside of the starters and legendaries, I'm more likely to remember the Pokemon introduced in Gen 1 or in Gen 3 than I ever am in Generation, uh, than any other generation other than 2.
Now, that brings me to a question about that. Or, not a question, more so of a. No, it's a fun fact question. Shit. Oh, come on.
Oh, I think we might have lost. Um, Assuming something is happening on his end, I'll continue the conversation. Um, Generation 2 had like very bland looking Pokemon, and I'll be honest, there are generations like that. Like Gen 5 in particular is a good one that were I actually no, I can't remember some Gen 5, but Gen 2 I think is just an outlier because I think they were just it was a sequel and they didn't know what to follow up with. If I'm going to be honest, I think the biggest problem is that it's hard to differentiate Generation 2 Pokemon with Generation 1 Pokemon, at least visually speaking, because they look like they're from the same thing, which makes sense. They were probably developed by the same people. I would not know that, so don't fact check me on that. In the meantime, though, another big part of the problem Generation 2 is that the story is kinda non existent other than the typical Pokemon story. Win the badges, go to the
So
gym. Oh,
my device I was using died. So
that's fine. That's fine. I was just about to say. I was talking about. I kept the conversation going, and I led to the story of Generation Two doesn't have much outside of it other than collect the badges. Which, while other games in the series and Generation One suffered from that, Generation One gets a pass because it was never the focus. But Generation Two, they focus on the return of Team Rocket. That should be a
And
lot
there,
more interesting than it is.
here's the thing. That's the issue that comes up with this is that one of the many issues I have with Gen 2, or Johto as a region, just Johto as a region in general, is that their main selling point when it first came out was Team Rocket's back. And I mean, I can't say as I blame them, but if you're gonna do that as your main selling point for the fans who purchased the original games and many games to come, still the story for them should be interesting. And that's also something I say that Hard Gold and Soul Silver should have changed up a bit if they were
Oh,
going to be a remake. Was change up the story just a bit,
enough to make.
like a Pokemon Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby happened, which
We'll get
at
to
the
that.
same time, considering what they did, I
We'll,
honestly, I can't say as I also can't blame them for going that route, because by this point, remakes were pretty much doing well. It wasn't until Heart Gold and Soul Silver, I think, that things really started to falter when fans realized, okay, you've given us at least 2 remakes of really good games. We need this remake to be a bit more oomph into the
which
story, a
we,
bit
we will.
better.
We'll get to Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby later, but for now, the return to Team Rocket is very bland, and you never. And I'll be honest, I'm hard pressed to find any Pokemon fans who even remember the new leader of Team Rocket, because Giovanni was such a presence that replacing him was always going to be a nigh impossible task, and it was impossible, at least with how it turned out. I barely remember his design. I think he had blue hair, but other than that,
He had blue hair and a weird. He kind of looked like He'll kind of look like Price, but with blue hair, and it's a bit more spiky.
well, I
That
mean,
was Petrol.
I don't.
Petrol?
Well, yeah, but it's hard to remember him because he only appears once in the game and then he goes away.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
I think a solution to that
no
would.
joke. Real quick, no joke. Before we even got to JoJo, I had to make sure I look up the names for these 2 people, and I've put a good bit of hours into both the remakes and the original, and I still can't remember their names for the life of me because
Yeah,
there really wasn't a leader.
but
There really wasn't.
yeah, and speaking of that, I think a good solution would have been to incorporate the legendary Pokemon that the games were promoting. Keep in mind, Gold and Silver were the first games in the series to promote legendary Pokemon as a focal point of the plot. And while Pokemon has never been plot heavy, well, until the recent games, but we'll get there, the legendary Pokemon are always a thing people look forward to, which is why Generation 3, I think, fixed a lot of the flaws with the team system. Magma and Aqua. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No. You finish up your sentence. I have a little fun fact for you.
Okay. Magma, Team Magma and Aqua are very dumb teams. Their motivations are laughably ridiculous, but they were smart enough to include the legendary Pokemon into their plans in this regard, and while their plans were dumb, they were still threatening.
That, and I'm gonna be honest, they had a lot more to pour for Groudon and Kyogre than compared to Ho-Oh and Lugia, which it's funny enough that there's plenty of people out there that find the legendary dogs, who are supposed, pretty much minor legendary Pokemons, to be much more interesting than the box art Pokemon.
Pokemon fell into habits for a while, up until Generation 6, actually, and I think even 6 kept this, but I'm not too sure because I barely remember that generation. Pokemon had a tendency, after Generation 2, to have 2 legendaries, a super legendary, like in the middle, and then they would have 3 pseudo legendaries. In Generation 2, it was the, Inkay, Rayquaza, I think that's her name, and freaking Suicune. And Generation 3. Oh shit, was there one in Generation 3?
What, a major Pokemon?
No, like a trio of Pokemon. Because, like, I swear to God, like.
So, yes, there is. So, let me, real quick, I'm going to put in a recap on all these to kind of make them, not so separate. So, Gen 1, we had Mewtwo and the Legendary Birds. Gen 2, we had Ho-Oh, Lugia, and the Legendary.
Right,
Dog.
the Reggies. The Reggies.
And the Reggies.
The Reggies.
We
Reggie.
we had Rayquaza, Groudon, Kyogre, and then the Reggies.
Yeah.
On top of Latios and Latias.
Reggie Ross, Reggie Steel,
and Reggie Ice.
and Reggie Ice.
Or some say Reggie Ice. I call it
Keep
Reggie
in mind,
Ice. That's all I've always.
yeah, but
named it that.
I've heard it that. But anyways, Pokemon for a while did follow that formula with their legendaries. It wasn't until the freaking, I want to say 6th generation that they broke that. But we're getting ahead of ourselves again. Generation 3, I think, is honestly is very much argued by many of the fan base to be the best in the series, which I see the merits in that argument. I disagree with it for one reason. Well, several, just because of my own personal preference, but Ruby and Sapphire were great games, and Emerald was a fantastic combination of the two, albeit its only flaw was that they replaced Steven as champion. I hated that.
And if we're talking about champions Pokemon real quick, I actually wanted to get that question out of the way. So, I'm sure by now you've heard of the Pokemon Houndour and Houndoom, correct? Like
Yeah.
the demon dog looking Pokemon?
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Which generation do you think
2.
that Houndour? Okay. See, I was gonna say if you had said 3, I'm gonna be honest. That was a very. I will be sad to admit this. That this was a misconception I had for years on end. And this real quick, that's one of the things I have an issue that kind of goes back into the issue with Gen 2 real quick is that you have a lot of new Pokemon, yet they're not available. So you have like in Gen 3 with Houndour being a kind of staple of some of the team's Pokemon, you think, oh yeah, no, this is definitely a Gen 3 Pokemon. Nope. Gen 2.
Yep. I always knew that was a Gen 2 one, but moving on from that though, Generation 3 I think is one of the first truly great games in the franchise. Not to say Gold and Silver aren't great. They were great for the time, but much like Emerald suffers from this too, albeit on a lesser extent, but they are victims of time. You know, even with the remakes, they are still victims of time. A lot of these issues were replaced, but by the time Emerald came out, they had learned the lesson of using legendary Pokemon in the plot, something that Gold and Silver desperately could have needed, as well as the first game when you really think about it.
That they did, and
what
there's
Go ahead.
How can I put so in terms of that, it was definitely a more serious tone within the game, a more plot at it, and
it wasn't forced though. That's the thing. Like
it wasn't forced.
We'll get to that one, but
was definitely a more of a selling a selling point than the previous games. I'd say because that was a step to a direction that could have, that could definitely have that had definitely helped their franchise out quite a bit. Because if you compare the numbers between the selling points between the previous generation and this generation, there was a lot more copies that were sold in this generation.
Well, part of it is that this was, like at this point, many people started watching like the anime as well as it got way better. So I think that this game was like the foundation of what Pokemon became today. Like I think Pokemon as a franchise would not exist the way it does without Generation 3. So for that, it owed a lot of credit. I will also say that, well, again, Team Magma and Team Aqua, very stupid teams. Their goals are idiotic. So idiotic.
They very much are. I mean, some might even consider them to be flipping brothers.
Well, I mean, their plans were I want to stop the ocean. I want to rise the ocean. Motherfucker, just no, like that. So dumb, so dumb. But they were smart enough to at least incorporate the legendary Pokemon in the franchise in their evil scheme. If it wasn't for the fact that their plan was idiotic, they could actually be really great villains. But their plan is idiotic. Their plan was so idiotic.
I could see, like, here's the thing. Despite how idiotic it was, I can see somewhat of a sense for them wanting to do that in that region. Because
Which one, Magma or Aqua?
either of the or.
Well, no.
And
Okay,
the
here's the
reason
thing.
being, well, hold on, the reason being is because of, like, if you look at the layout of the region, to some degree, there's a lot less land than there are,
Yeah, but
you know,
you do realize
ocean.
I don't want to get too into this, but the ecological impacts of that are baffling to consider. But
Oh no, it definitely is. That would bring a lot of ecological issues.
which, speaking of which, if there is a flaw in the Pokemon in this generation, it is mostly water types. Like fire types were a rarity, and to be quite honest, very useless in that generation. Blaziken's cool, but unfortunately, uh, its fighting type stuff is the only useful part of Blaziken in that generation. Which, thank God for other generations.
Yeah,
Also,
water type definitely had a
For-
much more
Yeah.
like much more of a use
Yeah.
than it did in previous generations because
With-
there was a lot more water to explore.
Exactly.
No,
But
10, too much water.
with that being said, for everything this game did right, one of the biggest flaws of this game was the rival. Basically, your opposite gender, Brendan or May, English respectively. They aren't bad, but they never you never want to really beat them. They're just more of a supportive rival. When that's
I'm gonna be honest.
fine.
Wally was more of a rival than May or
Well,
Brendan. Either which way,
Wally.
would have been nice to see more of him. Because here's the
Wally.
thing: you go through the game, and then there's Brennan or slash May, and you fight with them, and each and every time you battle them, they're pretty much like, "Hey, I just want to beat you." Wally actually has a strength,
Wally has an arc. Wally has an arc.
He has an arc and a goal. Granted, I would have preferred to see much more of Wally than May because
Or
in the end,
Brendan.
all he wanted to do was he wanted to go and make his way to Victory Hill.
He wanted to be strong. He wanted to be strong. He didn't want to be weak.
Strong.
And that's relatable, but at the same time, though, it makes it feel more like you're his rival, not that he's your rival. He's a good character, but he is a good rival. And the only time he's
That's
good
fair.
as a trainer and as a rival is in the remakes, which he's actually really tough in that. He actually is a decent fight, especially with the addition of Mega Evolution.
Also, that and his team became much more diverse.
Yeah, which I want to touch on the remakes briefly because, by God, they had the best post game in the entire series.
Oh, we'll get to that. There's one thing.
It's the
I'd
same
like to
generation.
say. I mean, it's the same generation, but there is pretty much a lot. There is a lot to talk about there.
There is,
But
but
there is one thing. Like, if we're going to combine them two, then
I would because they're the same generation. The only difference is the post game as well as some game mechanics, but they are still the
with
same.
that, there is one thing I'd like to move through before we even reach the post game. The music. This, I
Oh.
personally think, was the time, along with there being plant, was a major point for Pokemon to be like, all right, we got this music in Gen 2 and 1. Let's kick it up a notch, shall we? And I think that is something that definitely kind of split the community apart a little bit. From plot
We'll
to
get-
new regional Pokemon to exploration to really good music that kind of helped put a lot of pressure on the player when they're fighting. They give you that oh crud kind of feel. This is about to go down. I'm about to beat someone major. And Gen 3 is still by far my favorite generation in terms
Which
of
I will.
music.
Yeah, but anyways, let's go to the remakes because we talked about Heart Gold and Soul Silver last thing, and I do want to talk about the remakes because while there isn't too much difference, the addition of Mega Evolution does increase the gameplay uh, really well. I think it's a natural transition and uses it a lot better than X and Y ever did. We'll get there, but also the post game. Holy shit, that was a good post game.
Oh, that. Whenever I saw I heard about the depth. Whenever this game was being released, I'm like, oh shoot, this is the game that I grew up with, essentially. My first ever game. I want to know what they're adding in, so I checked up on it whenever it was coming out. Um, and I saw something about a new post game being the Delta episode. I'm like,
The Delta episode. Oh,
holy shit! When they released images, I was like,
well,
this
here's the thing.
is gonna good.
In terms of the series lore, it actually does canonize the theory of multiverse, saying that the for anyone who doesn't know, the post game of Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby is that a meteor is coming to Earth, to the Pokemon world, not ripping off Final Fantasy at all, and they have to stop it. One of the solutions that they used was they were going to transport it to another dimension. However, the one of the characters in this, I can't remember her name, but she's a really cool character, was like, "Oh, you could do that, but consider this. What if you send it to another world, just like our own, where there isn't Mega Evolution? They would have to deal with the meteor now. It would just be pushing the problem onto someone else." That confirms that none of these games are non-canon in the lore. It's just that for every game where a new feature is added, that can be explained with multiverse theory. So this Alpha Ruby and Omega Sapphire is a completely different universe, which has which is really cool.
That, and I have to say, there was a lot more character put throughout all the characters entirely. Wally had Wally
better.
felt more alive in this game.
Oh,
He
he
even
did.
had his own theme, which I have to say that was pretty kicker.
Yep.
Then the team leaders, they felt more alive as well. I mean, granted, they still did their stuff, but
They were playing it so
I think
stupid.
the best character by far out of that entire game, I have to say, was Zinnia. She had a lot of good lore put to her. She
Zinnia,
had
that
an
was her.
entire civilization that was touched
That was the
upon
girl's name.
until that game.
That was the girl's name. But
And well, yeah, that and her music, including violins into someone's battle track, really was a good move.
yeah, and
I'm
also
a big fan. Well, I'm a little biased about it because I'm a big fan of violins, but I think when you do a violin piece for a game really well, it's definitely going to stand out compared to the
to you, anyways.
well, I'd say to a good majority of the audience because there isn't a lot of violin pieces used in a lot of games. It's a lot of trumpets, drums, and maybe electric guitars, but not so much not so much violin.
Here?
No, we're still going.
Oh, sorry.
We apologize for that. Anyways, also, this is the first generation and only generation where you actually have a dad as your character.
Where you what?
This is the only generation where you have a dad.
Well, that too.
Yeah,
Also, something else. To push through that multiverse theory real quick, I wanted to say this was a cool move for them. Granted, they weren't made as rare, but I still enjoy going through it. Was the inclusion of the legendaries coming into this world?
Yeah,
I thought that was it's always been a cool idea to be able to catch it. I mean, of course, now it's later on down the road, it's just it's like, oh, we get to catch all the legendaries again. Cool.
Well, I mean, legendaries have always been a thing, but anyways,
Well, they have, but
yeah.
having them in numerous
Yeah.
amounts, including major legendaries, was really a cool idea, and it actually made the catching them refreshing.
Alright, but either way, now we get on to my favorite game series in the franchise because not only are the first two good, but I think that arguably, the combination, the third one, Platinum, is the best in the entire franchise. We're going to Gen 4 with Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, baby. Arguably the hardest game of the franchise with arguably the best champion, best Elite Four, and some of the best gym leaders until Sword and Shield.
Yeah, I mean they had. I disagree in terms of the teams being the best, but they definitely had arguably the hardest champion. I'd say of course up until
Cynthia
Sword and
is.
Shield.
Oh,
I'd say
I categorically disagree with you, my friend, in terms of Leon.
well maybe when I say champion, I don't exactly mean by character. I mean by their teams.
I know. I
What
still think
really
Cynthia is
makes
better.
them- I'd say those two are somewhat on an even scale.
No,
Though
they
Cynthia
aren't.
does top him by quite a little bit.
Exactly. Like, even putting aside the generational differences and the inclusion of fairy types, Cynthia's team, especially in Platinum, is perfectly balanced, way more than Leon's is, no matter which starter you choose. And on top of that, she gets better. She gets harder in the Platinum edition. She gets harder. She was already tough in freaking Diamond and Pearl, but with the addition of Togekiss to her party, it gets worse.
Well, and on top of that, when you look at the Pokemon stats, all right, what they did that a lot of people didn't exactly think about too often is that their stats they pulled a very slick move with her. Like for example, a Garchomp, they gave him max stats
They did.
before he was even level 100, making
And
him pretty much a KO against your team depending on what you use.
And on top of that, this was before the introduction of fairy types. Your only defense against this Garchomp was ice, and even then, you had to hope to God your speed was better.
Well,
Rival
and Dragon had a dragon.
Yeah, but therein lies the other problem. Like, if you have a dragon, dragon's weak to dragon, so it was more of a gamble there.
And another issue that was that was there in the game is that there was a lack of dragon type Pokemon. Literally, there was only one area that you could get another dragon until late post game, and that being inside of a cave, which was a rare percent chance, and that was being
true. But I've seen
a Gible.
Which, to be fair, I don't think they need another dragon type. Every generation has their iconic dragon type, and this one arguably is the best. Is one of the most iconic in the franchise. Rival still sucks though. If I'm going to give this game a flaw here, Rival sucks. Barry isn't god-awful, but I never felt the same drive I did to defeat him as others did Blue or the Generation 2 Rival, or any of the others, honestly. He's a smidge better than Brendan simply because of the fact that you do want to beat him, but it's more because he's annoying and less to do with the fact that you want to prove yourself to him. Also,
I can agree with that statement. Barry's by far one of my least.
Yep.
One of my least. He's not there.
I won't die on that hill. I will not die on that. He's above. Yeah, he's above Hal.
Hal.
We'll get to him.
Like, he doesn't even have a good
We'll
arc.
get to him.
I mean, at one. Well, not Hal. Barry doesn't even have a good arc. The only arc that I could see. Okay, so there's a few things that Barry himself as a character, I could see maybe being a little bit hard. Him wanting to become a protege or a student of Crasher Wake as a whole, I'd say that was pretty cool.
Yeah, but it goes nowhere, like most of the things.
It doesn't go nowhere.
But
then helping out with the lake Pokemon.
Speaking of Crasher Wake, really good gym leaders, really fun designs. I remember all of them. However,
I agree.
And in this game are the best villains in the franchise, Team Galactic. Arguably, Cyrus's plan is arguably the darkest villain in the franchise. And that is coming from a franchise where they literally had red-suited versions of Nazis, when you really think about it. Just when you really think about Gen 6. But moving on from that, Team Galactic felt more competent. Their design was really cool. Going more spacefaring rather than mobster or, thuggish as Magma and Aqua. And the commanders are memorable. and I like the space theme throughout. And Cyrus is arguably the best villain in the franchise. Arguably, because Gen 5 actually has a really good villain in the first game, anyways, but we'll get to that. And his motives solidify him as a madman, but a man who does believe in his vision. I fucking loved beating him because I wanted to beat him. Arguably, I think he was the best villain since Giovanni. Okay, I'm done with my round Gen 4 and how the good things are, how good it is.
I will agree with with the team being in Gen 4. They were definitely enjoyable to fight. The music was really good. I liked their designs a lot. They felt unique and really stood out compared to the other games. However, how can I put it? I don't think they really shined so much in Platinum or Diamond or not Platinum, but Diamond and Pearl as they did in Pearl.
Platinum, yeah.
Keep getting Platinum.
I understand, but
I really think they stood out a lot because they had a lot more built into them. For example, whenever you go through and you Cyrus awakens Giratina for the first time, which, by the way, props to flipping Game Freak for, I don't know if there was their intentions or not, but putting in a jump scare. I won't even lie, as a kid, if I were to play them when I was like 7, 8, or 9, without even thinking that something's going to come out, and then boom, he comes out.
Oh, I never was scared of that.
I'd say maybe not terrified, but more so of a jump.
I was never terrified or jumpy about that, if I'm going to be honest here. But
well, I mean, when it's aimed to a kid audience, I'd say that's
to a little kid audience. To like a little kid.
A little bit, but like I'd say that was a bold. I personally believe that was a very bold, well done move, might I add, to the Pokemon franchise.
It was well executed. I will agree that the scene was well executed. I just don't think it's terrifying. I would say to little kids, but as a kid who saw that myself, I was never jumpy. But you said the music, and there's one last thing I want to touch on. Cynthia's theme. Holy shit, does he have a good theme, a good battle theme?
We'll touch on that in just a second. Well, they're coming off from, like, finish off what I was saying. Whenever he finally awakens Giratina, he's brought to that place. That was really fun to explore. Granted, it was more of a linear set path because you are trying to ultimately get you in. It happens, but it was still enjoyable to see another realm.
And then
after going through and beat Cyrus, you go through and you could really tell that him being gone pretty much had a very huge impact on the rest of the team, which then brings me down to my next point about that entire series that I love. The entire region. All right. The entire region I feel like was very diversified and very well done in this place. You had both ocean exploration, land exploration, and then something that felt much more alive to doing was mountainous exploration. Whether it's during the main part of the game or the post game, especially post game. You get done, you beat the game, you get to go down to another area, and you get to explore a whole new, pretty much kind of like a mini region. You got the Battle Tower, the Battle Frontier, which love to see that make a return, but that was just a fun little addition they added in there. You get to own your own house. You have a lot of really tough trainers, and then you have a little mini side story with the remaining the remnants of Team Galactic trying to capture Hiran, which I felt was a really nice touch to, people might be wondering, okay, what the heck are they trying to do after their big bad leader is gone?
Yeah, which it gives more of a closure to it.
It gives a much more closure. And then going back to the main thing, something else that was really, I personally enjoyed that as a good addition was they brought back the base building system. And you get to go mining. I felt like that was really fun and enjoyable. And I'd love to see that as a return.
I enjoyed it. I can live without it, but again,
Well,
except-
it gives more to do than just.
oh, it gets more to
battling
do.
and
It
stuff
gets more
like
to do.
that.
I'm not saying it's bad, Jacob. I'm just saying that it wasn't my fancy.
Mhm.
I mean, it's
Which-
yeah. But seriously, I really want to touch on this. We haven't talked too much about the music, but holy shit, when you enter Cynthia's chamber, you hear the music like boom, like it feels like you're actually approaching someone who has earned the right to call themselves the strongest. And when you actually battle her, her theme is just perfect. And to touch back on what you were saying about how Leon is a contender, I disagree on so many levels.
Mhm.
Leon is a strong trainer, but unfortunately, he suffers from the fact that his generation is arguably the easiest in the franchise. Cynthia remains the hardest, and many people fear her to this day. Especially when you consider if we go with her platinum team, she has a fairy type added to her roster. Fairies are the new dragons. They are stupid OP.
I don't think he's the weakest. I personally
No,
think
I didn't say he was the
Diantha-
weakest. No, I never said he was the weakest. I just said that he was in the easiest game. The easiest.
Okay, the easiest. I heard weakest. My
No,
bad.
he's in the easiest game in the franchise. But I love Generation 4. I do. It's my favorite. I think it's categorically the best. The next generation, I think it's highly underrated. And that's Generation 5, which took its aesthetic from America, especially in the one city, which is basically just New York.
Yeah. Gen 5. Okay, hold. There is a lot that I want to talk about for Gen 5. Gen 5 had a lot coming to it. So I'm going to start first off. Again, geographical layout and going now. Geographically, Gen 5 had a meh.
It was based on
geographical
United
location.
States. It was based on
It
United
was
States.
based on the United States, but I have to say, going through both of the games, it did give a lot of exploration to it. Twist Mountain, Chargestone Cave, the mountain region in the east. Going and trying finding the shrines with the three Naduses around there, Tornadus, Landorus, and Thunderous, was quite enjoyable, and there was a lot of places to explore. Which all in all comes down to what is put on there, it being the teams. Oh boy, the teams, Team Plasma. They, as themselves, have been my favorite personal team throughout all of the. I feel like in the first game they really shined. They had a bit more of a moral or idealistic type of
That's
thinking
highly debatable because based on the way
To their
that they split in the second game, it's heavily implied and outright shown that N only held those ideals and that other members either were ignorant to the real villain Gensek's real plan, or they just didn't really care about the original plan. We're just doing it to gain prestige and power. I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Team Plasma. I think that the Knight Templar aesthetic is nice, as well as their own Civil War in the second game is kind of interesting. The only really thing I ever really cared about them was N and his father, Gensek. I'm probably butchering that, but I said earlier that how the next generation after 4 had a good rival. In my opinion, N is the true rival in that game.
Oh, I can agree with that statement 100%. He is really the true rival. The other two are just
They're your friends.
They're there.
They're your friends.
They're your friends.
Yeah, no,
Well,
N.
okay. I like Bianca. Bianca was pretty fun.
She was never
but
tough.
we'll get
though.
to her.
She was never tough. She was never tough,
Well,
and even she acknowledged it. She was like, "I'm not good at this."
Well, it isn't so much that she's tough, but we'll get to that right after you're done with N, because there is a little bit that I want to touch on in terms of her.
N, I think if Cyrus is my favorite villain, and Giovanni, I think Giovanni is my third favorite. I think N is my second favorite, at least in the first game, simply because he actually has ideals and he's under the guise that he is doing this for the right reasons. And unlike Cyrus, where he's wrong, it's more ambiguous in this game. It's very ambiguous as to if N is right or wrong. And the game never resolves that. And while that can be infuriating to some, I do enjoy that. You make your own decision. Also, the story. You know how I mentioned earlier that the legendary Pokemon needed to play more of a predominant role? Here is where they play the biggest role. The final battle with N is genuinely one of the best climaxes to a game. In any of these, you build up, you fight him, you learn about his ideology, and while you never really want to see him fail, but you can't allow him to succeed because his ideology is very, well, black and white. Which, ties perfectly. And finally, the game even acknowledges his point by giving him the legendary Pokemon, the opposite of which game you bought. In black, it was Zekrom. In white, it was Reshiram. It builds up, and then you eventually get the stone to get your legendary Pokemon, but up until the end, you never reach it until the very last second where they arrive and you're going to catch it. And then once you do, it starts with the two legendary Pokemon battling. It's a great climax and really shook up the formula because keep in mind, the formula before this was you get 7 badges, you get the legendary Pokemon and stop the team permanently, and that's it. This uprooted it. You start out fighting the Elite Four only to face the champions before N could, only to discover you're too late. N defeated the champion, and now he's the real champion. And thus he summons his castle, and you have to go through that. It's a great climax because the whole team is present throughout the game. Go ahead, you.
Which brings me real quick in terms of something that I like about Generation 5's team. There's a lot more lore given to it, and let me explain that real quick. So first off, right off the bat, you load up the game. It doesn't have any words, but you have a visual representation of what could potentially come, or what happened before the events of this game. I thought that was a really good move for Game Freak, and they honestly I'd like to see it again, but I don't think it should be done again at the same time because that just makes it all the more memorable. 2, Team Plasma, real quick. Hold up. I personally like what they did in terms of the split. And the reasoning behind this, real quick, is that when you go through the game, all right, they're giving, I guess this, of course, he tells you the ideals of wanting to set Team Plasma, setting Pokemon free, and in some cases going through and kind of...
Gensec never believed in any of that, dude.
No, he never... Hold on. Yeah, he never believed in any of that. But at the same time, he made the players think that he actually believed in that. For example, with Munna, or with Munna in the Dream Yard, he appeared. Granted, it was a dream, but the team grunts literally feared him, and even told them that they were pretty much wasting their time. And there's been other moments within the first game where he's like, you know what, players, you're right. This isn't the way you should be doing this. You should just give them back their Pokemon, which I felt like was a really good step forward for having the plot twist being, he wants to take over the region essentially. Spreading lies to N to kind of get what he wanted.
That isn't relevant at all.
Yeah, which then in the end, with the second game, I actually like their split for a couple of reasons. One thing is that you actually have grunts feel like they're actual people, because they're people, in both sides which is even shown in the final bit of the first game, or I believe even later on in the first game, you see, or earlier on, that you see them question whether or not they actually have a moral standing in the way the Team Plasma operates, which is why I personally find them to be a much better team than Team Rocket or Team Galacticus, because they feel more alive with that.
You would have a point if they ended it at the first game, but they don't, and they go with the second game. I think the split actually is a detriment because because Neo Team Plasma is a dumb idea. I think Gen 6 should have just gone with something else. It would have made them more alive, but it just makes them feel, I don't know, cliche. One of them is the noble knight, and the other one's like the white knight, and the other side is we're Neo Team Plasma, but dressed in black, we're the Black Knight, and it only starts to lessen their impact. And Gensek doesn't really care about any of that. He just wants domination. He just feels like a carbon copy of Giovanni, albeit with a better design.
Mm-hmm. Which I do see where you're coming from with that. Something they could have done differently to make it have a much more impact is you see N leading the Neo Team
and
Plasma.
there is the other problem.
Hold on, and showing that the new Team Plasma actually having a bigger impact. Maybe like in certain, different towns, aside from facing off against them, they are actually doing, helping out towns, building stuff,
They are, but
helping
they
out
are.
Pokemon. It's not, it's not as noticeable as they should have been.
Yeah, but the problem with that, though, is that they also abandoned their ideals. N's ideals were, whoever believed in him, was that the Pokemon should be free. They shouldn't be in the balls. But they seem to maintain the status quo in the second game. N is a fascinating character, but his classification as a villain is more of an antagonist, more than a villain. Gensek's the real villain, and in the first game, he doesn't get much time to shine, because N overshadows him. In the second game, he's barely present. And while his actions are very terrible, they never go and beyond anything else that anyone's done in the series. Team Plasma was a good idea, but it was a faulty execution, especially in the second game, where the second game's concerned.
Mm-hmm.
I see your points. I do see your points, and I appreciate that you can see something that I can't, but I can't overlook the flaws of this.
Of course, no, there's plenty of flaws within them, and many more. But
also,
real quick,
go ahead.
I want to state real quick, Bianca.
Yeah.
She was not tough, but something that I can appreciate now, because it was pointed out to me, all right, that I never once thought of. You actually see responsible adults in the game. For an example, Bianca's dad's telling her, hey, no, don't go out on this journey. You're only 10 years old. You could get hurt. Of course.
Yeah, but it only serves to...
Yeah, that's one part, but it's still enjoyable to see, which is why I like Bianca, because in the end, she's like, okay, I suck.
It's enjoyable until you realize... It's enjoyable until you realize that, by the logic of that conversation, every parent in Pokemon history has been a bad parent up until this point.
Of course.
So I feel like that only serves to hurt it more than help it. And while it's a cool character moment, it does have some serious ramifications for the series as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that being said, though, Generation 6.
Real quick, before we jump to Generation 6, I cannot leave this unnoticed. Gym leaders actually do something much more than the previous games.
Now, if only I remember them. You got Cowboy?
The trios.
You got Cowboy Boy?
Lenora. You got Bugsy. You got
Jacob. I only remember Jacob. If I'm going to be honest here, I remember a handful of them. I remember the trios because they were trio split, and you actually choose who you fought, which actually always.
Well,
yeah.
I'm touching on them for the audience.
Yeah.
You got Elise, you got Clay, you got Bryson, and you got either Iris or...
Iris is only memorable because she was in the anime. Same with Clyde, which people hate him, which I can understand. Next...
Drayden. and Drayden.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Then
mhm.
what really made them, I personally think, like as gym leaders as a whole, that to shine was the ending.
They show up in the
sequence
end.
of it.
Look, they do an end game thing where they show up and are like, "Avenge gym leaders assemble," and then that's it.
Yeah.
That's their only
It's a
contribution.
really cool moment, and I feel
It's a
like they
cool moment.
actually try to do something about the groups compared to other games where they're just like, oh yeah,
Yeah, but that
we
also
need you to do this, or
again,
we're
that
just gonna
lessens-
sit here and not help the fight whatsoever.
Yeah,
We're gonna
that-
let you take them all on your own.
that
Which,
again,
granted,
it only serves
only
to
happens.
dude. That only serves to make the gym leaders and the other ones, like the parents, look incompetent, which they aren't. And I'll be honest, it's by happenstance that they were here at that point. I like that moment, but it's a moment. And honestly, the only memorable ones are the cowboy one, Roxy from 2, because she's fun. She's just fun. She's this punk rock. She was basically prototype Pierce.
I disagree. I think that moment really made them shine, and at
It's a
least
mo-
a bit
yeah,
more
but
memorable.
I said it was a good
because-
moment. I never denied it was a good moment, Jacob,
Well,
but it's only
I'm
a
just-
moment. It really is only a moment. That's all it is. And also, while it's infuriating in its own right, because these hopes have been built up over the games, and I thought what they were going to do is, as you go through the castle, you have to fight them. You get a chance to heal, and then you have to fight them. An evil kind of Elite Four, or how many there were. Like some double battles. It would have been cool to see them, but no, you don't get to fight them. The gym leaders get to fight them, which is infuriating in its own right.
It's upsetting. That is something I will say is
Yeah, so
upsetting
well,
that they didn't do it. Maybe if it was grunts instead. If it was grunts,
yeah,
I'd say okay,
yeah,
it's fine.
that would have been fine. It
Right.
would have given gym leaders a chance, but
Come
it still would have kept the story focused on you, and it also would have been a build up to N. We've seen these guys throughout the entire game, and each time you're like, I want to kick their asses. You don't get that chance. You only get to fight N, who admittedly is a good final boss, and then Gensek, who, again, is an admittedly good final boss. It's a good moment, but it's infuriating, like, when you really consider the wasted opportunity. And speaking of wasted opportunity, Generation 6. They introduced fairy types. they introduced fairy types.
Okay.
Okay, if I had to
So-
say something else, 1 second. Another nice thing about Generation 6, it's not Generation 7.
Okay, that I disagree. Okay, but we'll get to that when that comes down to it. So Generation 6
Okay.
was not that memorable.
No.
All right, the region itself was
France-based.
it was
The gym leaders were
okay.
also very
But
forgettable.
the being in France was a good idea.
But like everything, it was executed poorly. And
It was very executed poorly.
and
and
the
more
gym leaders
s-
are very unmemorable.
The gym leaders, I will say, are very unmemorable.
Also, the champion is
and
very unmemorable too. You said her name was Diana or something. I didn't even remember her
but
until.
I think she was trying. They were trying to go for another Cynthia, but they failed.
They
The
failed.
music,
They failed. Oh
music
my
was
God,
good.
they failed. I don't even remember what her
But-
team was. That's how bad she was. And also, she wasn't even the
Yeah.
final boss. It was
She had a Mega Gardevoir. That's about it.
that should be a
Mega
lot
Gardevoir.
cooler. That should be a lot cooler than it sounds, Jacob.
mean, Yeah, no, it should have been. I mean, she had
Well,
other Pokemon
okay.
like Mega Gardevoir.
Yeah. Okay,
Uh,
let's talk about the actual good aspects of Generation X. The King is a fascinating character. He's a really great character,
Like,
even though you get
here.
limited access. You get limited time with him. He's still great. Like that's all he
His-
needed.
His lore and the music that goes along with it, like
It's
his entire
fascinating.
interaction for me, I won't even lie, it is the only moment that actually makes me want to cry because I feel bad for the guy.
At the same time,
Like
though,
he
he
all
is
he
a
wanted
monster.
to end a war that was happening because he
He was
I mean,
driven by
he was-
revenge. He didn't want to just
he,
end
he
a
was
war. He was driven by
he was-
revenge because his Pokemon
And-
died, and he didn't even want to end the war. If you recall in the series, the machine was designed to bring back a Pokemon to life,
yeah.
but it cost the lives of everything around it.
everything around that.
That's what ended
And-
the war unintentionally. Stopping the war was unintentional. He just wanted to bring back his Pokemon, which, while well intended, did lead to a canonical genocide in the Pokemon universe. Like
Yeah.
that. And speaking of genocide, oh wait, no. Before that, Mega Evolution. It's better than Z moves. It's better than Dynamaxing, and by extension, Gigamaxing. It's more practical in battle. It changes the flow naturally, and you can do it whenever. And it's also long lasting. It's actually
Cooler Pokemon.
it makes them cooler. It's actually really cool, and I'm really sad that they cut it out of later games. I mean, you get it in Sun and Moon, but at that point, they had their own gimmick, and we'll get to that.
The other thing about the King was that his Pokemon left him, and then in the end, he realized his mistake. He's been wandering for about 1,000 years, which god damn, if he wasn't an elf, I'm not sure what race of people he'd be. But
I actually have a reason for this. There was a reason. The machine. It granted him immortality. The machine also granted him immortality.
That is fair.
Which, serves well to his themes of regret, because what he did will haunt him forever, because what he did literally caused him to be alive. Thus, so what he did affected him, and he'll never forget it, because what he did makes him so that he will never die. Also, the villains suck. My god, they were my worst villain team until Generation 7.
They were trying to be flippin' Team Rocket.
No, they weren't. They were trying to be Nazis. They were literally trying to be Nazis. Like, their motivation was that they wanted to create a perfect society where they had a specific look, and they believed themselves superior because of that look.
Well, I see them as a mixture of Team Rocket and Team Galactic.
They're
the reason for
Nazis.
Team Rocket is because throughout the rest of them, for one, they're trying to get. They're just wanting to be rich right off the bat.
Well, no,
then you go to the Pokeball factory. They're trying to steal Pokeballs. Team Rocket also.
These games have repetitive plots.
The Master Ball. And then Lysander wanted to pretty much be what Cyrus was. He wanted to create a new world.
Yeah, but unlike Cyrus, Cyrus believed that everything needed to be wiped out. There was no discrimination. This guy wanted to create a perfect society based on what he deemed perfect, of what was there. He was literally a Pokemon version of Hitler. He wanted to kill everyone that he deemed imperfect, and that everyone he deemed perfect could live. He literally was just Hitler in the Pokemon universe. Why did he suck so hard then? Because, that should be the easiest villain to make interesting or, hateable. But no, I just feel okay, I just want you gone. Okay, you're gone. Good.
Their entire team, personally, I could see the Hitler aspect. It just, the Nazi aspect, ultimately, it felt too much of copy and paste. It's like they were trying to make another Generation 1, and they failed.
Oh, yeah, but with that being said, it really isn't Generation 7. I at least like some aspects of Generation 6. I am hard-pressed to find anything I like about Generation 7.
Generation 7 actually had
I will let you start.
Lot of good interest. I had a lot of interesting and really cool moments.
I'll let you start on this, because I know that everything I am about to say is going to be negative, so I will start with the positive. Go ahead, Jacob.
Real quick, the only negative, I'm going to say this right now, the only two negatives I have. How unexplorative it is. It's too linear. And you have all these islands that they make you think, before you even play the game, which island can I go to first? No, you're stuck. Also, having the fences posted up like that around the island just doesn't make sense. How are people supposed to cross that and do their typical,
it's
their
Pokemon
daily
suspension
lives?
Disbeliefs. Let's move on from that part, because suspension disbeliefs.
And then the other thing, it's hand-holdy. Well, by that, too many cutscenes. However, in terms of what that also brings me down to this, there are plenty of cutscenes in it that I do like. More so like the towards the ending, and even a lot of even involving Team Skull. Now,
Did
in
you
terms of
address Hal, by the way? You said there were going to be two things you didn't
one,
like.
the island challenges,
Oh, boy.
I think they're actually a really cool idea. It brought a new aspect to the game. However, it can also be ruined because how?
Hal is the worst rival in the
How?
franchise. He
He
is too upbeat.
was
He never takes his losses seriously, and he never drives to get stronger. He's just there. That's all he is. He is just
also
there. Which, thank God for Glaceon, or whatever the guy's name is. But even then, he is barely present. He doesn't feel like a rival. He just feels like okay, I'm here. I'll battle you with a cool custom Pokemon, but then I get nothing.
also, along with that, two other things. One, as an example of him just being there, or being too
Glaceon,
upbeat about the battles and being there. When you arrive in that one western town that I cannot remember for the god's life of me,
That's
you
fine.
literally you've been playing at this point for about 6, 7, 8 hours, and he goes through and
Okay.
calls you a noob.
Okay,
Why?
so
That
yeah.
I can understand if that was at the beginning of the game. But why on earth halfway through the game already and you're like,
Also,
let's
Glaceon.
show this noob what we Alolans can do.
Okay, also Gladeon. Gladeon is also your rival in that game. He is the opposite problem. He is too edgy. Say what you will about the other rivals, they got some light moments and, like, some comedic. Gladeon is just, oh, woe is me. I am Sepher Virgil Shadow the Hedgehog. Except
He
not
is
nearly.
edgy, but
Alright,
his moments makes up for him being edgy.
okay,
I
yeah.
will say something else. Was it not with Hal, but the other two, the rivals
Lily.
being Lily.
Well, Gillian
and
Battle Lily, she's a companion. She's never a
well,
rival in
okay,
that game.
companion. Either which way, like the people that you go along the way with Lily and Hal, not Lily and Hal,
The
Lily and
professor. I think it's the professor. I think that's the only other character in that game that.
oh, hold up, I almost forgot about this part about how he doesn't know how to save his money. Literally, any
He's an
single
idiot.
moment he gets a chance to, let's go get a Pokemon Sala, which those things are actually pretty expensive.
I'll be
I think
honest.
they're like 600, 700 Pokédollars.
Which, to be
They're
fair,
not cheap.
Jacob, we don't know the currency exchange between that and the American dollar, so
It's-
that world's
if I'm
economy
not
is already kind of fucked, anyways.
It's pretty much like
Kids carry like thousands of dollars in this world, Jacob. I don't think
they
that.
do.
Yeah, so like let's not focus on that. But all right,
So
are you done
Lily
with
and
the puzzle?
Hal. Hold on, no.
Go, go.
There is a lot. There is quite a bit. So Lily and Hal and Gladian. I think those two are perfectly fine. I think his edginess and the moments that he has leading up to it was pretty good. Even Team Skull as a whole, I think they were a really good team.
They're not good
they
villains.
covered all.
They're fun, but
Okay,
they are not good villains.
they're not meant to be villains. That's the thing,
Yeah.
and that's what I like about them. Like you think, oh yeah, no, they're villains. They're really not. They're just, they put out a lot of stuff I guess stuff that should really make common sense out there. For example, whenever you first meet them, even typically in previous Pokemon games, the gym leaders or whoever you're with acknowledge them as a huge threat. And then there's the first captain that's like, so about this trial or something along the lines of that. He doesn't even acknowledge them, which I think is really comical. And
It's comical.
they are a really good group of bunch.
They're not.
They show what
They're fun.
thugs.
Yeah, they're basically white guys trying to be like edgy is what they are, and they're fun, but they're not good villains. And it's only made worse with the Aether Foundation, which are just nothing. The main villain of the game, Limoise, whatever the fuck her name is, she has no real aspects of her that make her redeemable in any sort of way whatsoever. And then she gets frickin' tentacled. Like, she gets jellyfist.
Yeah.
That's what happens to her. She gets jellyfist. And like, it's supposed to be implied that, oh, this made her evil. No, she was already evil to begin with. How
Sorry.
is the worst rival in the franchise and Lily's journey should be good, but it's forced upon you, and like it breaks the game with like unnecessary cutscenes. Like, here, I'm taking my first step, or ooh, I'm doing this for the first time, or ooh, I'm doing this. On top of that, the Z moves are so pointless to the point where you can actively ignore them throughout the game. And they're not even that fun to use. If you want to see the poses, you can just Google them. With Mega Evolution, at the very least, I always felt like I was getting something out of it. And on top of that, the Elite Four and vice versa, the champion battle, is arguably the worst in the franchise. Diantha is no winner, but she's a champion. You don't even get to fight a champion. You fight the professor.
I like that aspect. That actually is a really cool idea for the game, personally. Because beforehand, there's already an established champion.
No, there is.
You get to.
Oh yeah, in the previous games, yeah, there are.
Previous games, there's an established champion. This is the first time where you actually, you get to literally see the growth of an Elite Four for an island that's never had one. That is such a good idea.
It's a good idea that
story.
It's a good idea, but like everything, it's a faulty execution. The points of the champion,
I think,
are that they are the build-up. They are the ultimate goal, and every game has built up their champion. In Generation 1, Blue was your rival throughout. You fought him, and then eventually he was your final trial. In Generation 2, Lance, you already knew that he was dangerous from the Elite Four previously, and he's a dragon user. A very deadly threat, especially in that generation. Generation 3, Steven was built up as this great character, and you never doubted his strength. Generation 4, Cynthia, the best champion in the franchise. Generation 5, N, one of the best climaxes in a Pokemon game. Generation 6, there's a champion. She's present, and you do respect her power. But here, who is even the final boss? The professor?
Here's the thing.
He was... Well, I'm not done. I wasn't done. The professor was never built to be that strong. They are never meant to be that strong. The only build-up was when he did that luchador thing, but that didn't imply strength. That just implied he was a fun character. It didn't build to anything worthwhile. I think it would have been a better boss if you had fought like something like Gladion. Like, let's say he was like you had to fight him to be the champion. That would have been at the very least memorable, but nothing else about it is. You just fight the professor, and that's it. That's the only worthwhile. That's the only thing. I genuinely do not like Generation 7.
I disagree with that, actually. And I think the way they had it set up was actually perfectly fine. For one hand, they were kind of nodding towards the fans, because beforehand, alright, there have been many theories, and even people actually, no, it wasn't even theories. There were theories, and then there was actual flipping data found within the first games that the actual person that was supposed to be your rival, or not your rival, but the champion, was Oak himself. Many thought that, and then many found some information for that to be true. So I felt like this was a good nod towards the fans.
It's a nod, but it's not just because it's a nod to the fans doesn't make it good.
Hold on. Here's what really makes it good. You think about it this way. You go through your entire journey, all right? You've done a lot on your journey. You've battled the evil people. You battled, pretty much a world disastering situation. You come back to where it's all begins. You battle the person who pretty much gave you your first Pokemon, and I felt like that was actually a cool bit. And then afterwards, you finally like you're the champion. You get to defend your title when you go through. I mean, granted, I don't think you should have been allowed. I think it should have been optional to go through the Elite Four again. But either which way, for what they did, I think that it's pretty cool that you get to defend your title. And going and fighting the professor, I felt like a really good nod to it. You get you start where you begin.
Okay. I'm looking at it for that way, Jacob, but I still disagree because at least with Blue, they built up that he was strong. They built up that he was always one step ahead. The professor was never built up to be the final challenge. He helped build this, but he was never implied to be super strong. That's the problem. The professor, quite honestly, was never built up to be that strong. And it just feels like it comes out of nowhere. It should have been something else, or it should have been... And like building up the Elite
Actually-
Four just means that you build up to nothing. The game doesn't spend any time being like, he's going to be your final opponent. This guy's going to be your final opponent. In every other game, they build up the champion. They build up the final boss. And while others have dips in quality, they at least have the benefit of build up. The Elite Four has build up. I will say that. The Elite Four has build up because you fought them before and you know how tough they are. This has no build up. And also, while I'm on this,
They're
the trials. I hate the freaking trials. They are so pointless. They are just gym challenges. They are just gym challenges, and they just don't want to be called gym challenges.
well, there is real quick. I think there was build up for that, and
Where?
granted, it was not as a good build up. If you think about it, through the entire game, he talks about making an Elite Four and a championship like the other regions. Beforehand, the regions never had one.
Yeah, that doesn't
because-
build up in
I
the
say,
boss.
if you think, hold on. If you think about it, all right, champions and Elite Fours, they're meant to be the strongest trainers you have to fight.
Mhm.
Well, shouldn't the person who created them should be the strongest person?
No.
I think that was a good.
No,
I
because
feel
that
like-
doesn't work in real life. Do you think the people that built the rocket were the astronauts, for example? No, they were not trained
Well,
to
okay,
be that.
but
They built it,
that's-
but that doesn't mean they get to. They don't get to experience the fruits of their labor. And while there's an ethical debate about that, Neil Armstrong didn't build a rocket, but he was the first man to walk on the moon.
Okay, but this is coming in from a fantasy setting set in kids area.
Yeah,
Okay.
but even
That I
even by
say,
that logic,
personally,
there was no
in
build up to
terms-
it. It was just, I have this dream. I have this dream. Okay, show me how strong you are. With the other champions, it's
I-
always been implied that there was strength. There was never any indication that this guy was strong. Hell, when you do see him fight, he's about the same level as you, so he's building it up. Whereas the other
Okay.
champions, other than Blue, which was done better, it was implied that they were already that strong. They're the top dog for a reason. And even with Blue, he was always ahead of you. So it was always a present aspect of the game where he was there. He was always ahead. He is always the top, even if you beat him. The Professor
Okay.
never had any of that.
Okay, maybe not just, him building the Elite Four. There were other instances. For example, you see an exchange between the Professor and what was his Guzma. They both talked about their times being trial goers, and they both could have became a captain, or even becoming a Kahuna for that matter if they kept going. So I'd say he was still pretty good.
Yeah, but
Now the trials.
they suck, dude. Like,
I actually think they were a good idea. The reason being, yeah,
good
to
ideas.
some degree, maybe they should have been called gym challenges. But I think calling them island challenges actually was better. It fit with the theme. The theme is Hawaiian. Hawaiian has a much more nature-esque, I guess, to their entire regional landscape. I feel like having and it was in reference to a lot of old traditions that Hawaiian had. They were going off of traditions, and I think that was really good. It made the region feel like you were exploring the region that it was based off of.
Assuming that any of that is true, good ideas do not mean good execution, and the execution is they were too easy, they never felt like actual challenges, and they only served to make them less. You fought one Pokemon, whereas other times you had to conserve and be smart about it. They were way too easy and not that challenging. And doubling back on the Professor aspect, just because he was a trainer once before doesn't mean he was keeping up with it the whole time. And on top of that, the fact that his Pokemon were so low level when you saw them only emphasizes the fact that he's building his team the same as you. There is nothing. We're not going to agree on this, in my opinion.
That's the That's the issue in terms of them being too easy. All right, Generation 6.
7.
Now hold on. Let me explain. So, I feel like the second half of Generation 5, or probably the start of Generation 6, is when the entire company completely divided against, the fan base. It became less about the older audiences who were playing it, and much more for the younger audiences. They were getting a lot more younger audiences to play it. So naturally, they would go through and make Gen 7 a bit more easier for those who were younger. It was never really meant for us older fans. It was more
No, but there's a
younger
right. But there
audiences.
was even then there was a right way to do it, which was demonstrated in
Yeah,
Sword and Shield. They were able to
here's
balance that out easily.
that is true,
They made it optional on the
but
E's. You could have avoided those the raid battles and trained a traditional way, or you could have gone the easy way. This forces you to
well,
take the easy way at every opportunity. There is nothing here.
that's the thing though. They were trying out from what I see it, they were trying a new business, business area. A bit not new business area, new business idea, I guess you could say.
Like,
They were wanting to try to see what the effects were on trying to cater more towards the younger children, the younger audience. So they naturally went and tried to make a game that was a bit more easy
it should have
than
been the difficulty should have been optional. That's all I'm saying. But look, Jacob, we aren't going to agree
I
on
mean,
this.
the difficulty option should have been for every game, but they only did that with Generation 5.
Yeah.
I personally think that like the gen challenges or the trial the trials were good, but
Yeah.
they're easy for a reason, and they were doing it for a specific audience since there was a majority of the
Okay.
audience. And if I was in that position, I'm gonna be honest, I'd probably do that too because
I would have
you're ultimately in the end you're trying to get the most out of
Okay.
you're trying to get a lot of money off of this.
You know what? Out of curiosity, what do you think is the worst generation? I'm just curious. What do you think is the worst generation in the franchise? I obviously mine is 7, and for a lot of the fans, it is 7. What's yours?
It was 6 was the
That's fair.
worst.
That's
It
fair.
just
That is fair.
it felt like an ultimate. It just felt
Nothing.
too
It felt
much
like nothing.
well, here's my if I were to be biased about this, I felt like Generation 6 was copy and paste, and that they were just pushing too much for trying to get the older audience back in, which is fair because by this time a lot of the older audience stopped playing it. But I felt like just it felt too much like they were trying to push a Neo Kanto, and that was the wrong move. Kanto was Kanto for a reason, and no one should. They shouldn't. Personally, I don't think that they should have been gone to try
Okay.
to make another Kanto.
Here's how I view it, Jacob. Regardless of Generation 6 flaws, it added. It added fairy types. It added Mega Evolution, a thing that carried over to the next generation, and fans do want back.
Oh,
In the
agreed.
grand scheme of things, what did Generation 7 actually add to the franchise? Nothing really iconic. Everyone hates Hal. Everyone typically agrees that the story is very loaded and honestly could have been cut. A lot of it could have, plenty of it could have been cut. Generation 6 at least has the benefited addition that it added to the franchise. One of the best types in the franchise. Generation 7 added nothing. The only thing it added were Z moves. And they were so unused and so unpopular that they literally got rid of it the next game. There is like not a big thing that I've seen to gain back Z moves. Everyone wants back Mega Evolution. That's why it's the worst for me, because they'd added nothing. Say what you will about the other games, they're good, they have their highs, they have their lows, they all added something. This added nothing.
No, I'd say Generation 7 did at least add something to
Okay,
it.
name it.
The idea, okay, the idea of exploration again.
Okay.
More so like bringing it back, because beforehand there wasn't a lot of exploration to give. But they gave the idea when you first get the game, you see all these islands, they give you the idea of like, oh shoot, I can explore this to my heart's content. Which then they brought over, of course, they ultimately failed at, but they brought that
They failed
over
it.
to
And also
they brought that over to Generation
and
8.
also the
Generation 8 has a lot of exploration
We'll get
to
to
it.
that.
Granted,
we'll get to
not
that.
as much as the others, but
No, well, here's the thing. We'll get to that, but here's the thing. All the other games had exploration. There is and like you're I assume you're talking about the wild area? That had the benefit of changing the gameplay dramatically as well as the camera. Generation 7 didn't even do that. The islands are just stand-in for cities. Nothing about the islands make them unique from one another other than several locations and legendary Pokemon on top of them, which was already done. Generation 4 had the lakes. Freaking the Reggies in Generation 3. Many cave systems and throughout the entire generation. Exploration, they wanted to make it feel more open, but it's still linear.
I mean, yeah, it's still linear, but they expanded upon it a little bit. Granted, I mean, they could do more with it later on down the road.
Yeah, they
but
did,
still,
but they added nothing that the other games hadn't already tried to do. Even with exploration, the only difference was that the graphics were improved and they could show more scene pieces. But that's not a progress of the game itself, rather as the technology that went into the game. I'm not going to say that Generation 3 was give credit to Generation 3 for adding color. That's just a product of the time. But speaking of, well, let's move on from that and let's go to one of the more controversial generations. Sword and Shield, Generation 8. There is plenty of controversy with this one due to its initial release.
National Pokédex!
Look,
But
it got fixed, okay? That's what I'm going to say about that.
Well, no, hold on. National Pokédex, but at the same time, I think it's a good stepping stone, actually. I personally agree with the National Dex being removed. It sucks that a lot of fan favorite Pokemons were, removed.
Yeah, but it gives the new ones a chance to open. It gives the new Pokemon a chance to shine.
It does, and I'm gonna be honest. Considering the way Game Freak works, I don't know if it's the president's option. The president or
It's
the
a
higher
company.
ups in the company.
It's a company in a foreign
like,
nation,
t-
so there's only so much we know.
I don't. Which is why I was saying it could be a number of things, but for one, it seems like in terms of their track record of time, spent on games, I can understand why they didn't go through and put, a custom animation for what, nearly 1,000, if not at 1,000 Pokemon overall into the game. That's a lot of animations you got to do for customizing an open world. And I'll be honest, for how big the region is, I think just taking out, some here and there was a really good fit. If we had kept all 950 or 980 or how many there are currently Pokemon in one game.
932. If Mega Evolutions are arguably counted as separate Pokemon, which each one being given its own Pokemon entry, then it's 980. However, the official count stands at 893.
What? Yeah, it would feel a lot. I personally think it would feel a lot cramped, a little bit crammed, and definitely would overshadow the other Pokemon. I'm gonna be honest, my first time playing through that game was enjoyable.
Oh no, it's very enjoyable, and it does have a lot of replay value, and DC is very enjoyable.
Oh yeah.
The flaws are apparent though. Team Yell never really gets a chance to shine, and they try to copy Team Skull. And the villain, Chairman Rose, is thrown in at the last minute, and while he has an awesome theme, he is basically pointless in the story, and honestly could have been fixed by making Olena the villain of the game.
Yeah.
And finally, but with that being said though, the gym leaders are some of the most well-received in a long time. The max raid battles give an option to difficulty. While experience share is still a thing, I don't think that necessarily makes the game easier. Rather, it does play to people not having the time they used to grind all of the Pokemon. You don't.
Should have been not, but
it should have been optional. It should have been an optional thing, but in returns with that, I could see a lot of people enjoying that asset just because it takes time to grind your Pokemon, and that's not a lot of the time that people have anymore, especially the older fans. Keep in mind, this game franchise is over 20 years old. Most people who play this are adults with jobs, so I understand that aspect. And finally, Leon, while not the most challenging champion, is still a fun champion and serves more as your real rival in the game. Hop,
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Hop is better than Hal in that he wants to get stronger and he does react to his defeat. Marty is just fun because
Yeah.
she has great motivations, and Beatty is a return to form for all the asshole rivals you fought.
I I can sympathize with BD a little bit. I can say
You
I
can
don't
s-
think he should have been as asshole of a person as he is, but I can say that his assholeness is justified in some sort of sense. The poor
eh,
kid was an orphan, and all he's really trying to do
that's not sympathy.
is,
That's just giving explanation. What he suffers from is a clear case of superiority complex. He believes
I
he's the
mean,
best because he was chosen by the best, and he has to believe that. And while it's sympathetic to a point, he's still an asshole. I mean, he destroyed a
no,
historical
he is
ruin,
still an
and
asshole.
while that historical ruin was just a front for the real site, he didn't know that. He was willing to destroy a piece of art of history just because he wanted to serve the chairman.
Mm-hmm.
Leon is a fun champion. He has personality. He's not the toughest in the series. That still either goes to Cynthia or Steven. And the reason I say that is that while he has a good team, his team does change based on which Pokemon you pick. So you have one that you're terrible against and one you're really good against with your starter. That's not giving incentive. I feel like where Cynthia and Steven shine especially is that their teams are consistent. They stay the same. And therefore, whatever you choose as your starter is either a boon or a downside, depending on what you go with and depending on your personal preference. And while his Gigantamax Charizard is great, it's still just a fire type. And they're not and while I love fire types, they aren't the strongest by a mile. There's a reason uh, why most of the champion Pokemon are like some of the better types because they need to be a challenge. Garchomp is one of the strongest because Dragon is still one of the strongest types. Gardevoir
Oh yeah.
is a strong psychic, and with the addition of Fairy, it overcomes the weakness of Darkness and is a tough Pokemon. And while it ultimately is very forgettable, at the very least, it was still a challenge. Charizard is a fire and flying type. All you need is electric, and it's gone. With Gardevoir, you had to use ice, and you had to pray to God that it didn't hit first.
You know, that's the other thing with fucking Gardevoir and the Charizard is that I'm gonna be honest. The only thing I was terrified, or well, I wouldn't say terrified, but worried about in terms of his team wasn't even the Gigantamax Charizard. It was the fact that he had one of the most notorious Pokemon on his team for being too powerful and even getting banned from competitive playlists, and that being Aegislash. That man, if you get hit by that thing and you have a Pokemon weak to that, you're screwed.
But on the other thing, though, if you do know the type matchup, it's falls all the same.
Oh yeah, but
Generation 8 is a great step for the franchise. I think it's a flawed step, but it's better than Generation 7 and 6. We can both agree on that. In that we cared about the world, the towns and locations are beautiful, which is a product of the graphics, but the design team does deserve all the credit for coming up with these ideas. And the gym leaders are memorable. Freaking what was the meme? Thick Russian mom.
I think so.
Yeah, the gym challenges are not the most challenging, but they are fun. Not only were the generation gym challenges not really that hard, but they were never fun. I never really enjoyed doing them. They just felt like a chore. These, at the very least, I'm like, some of them are chores, but other ones I'm like, I'm having fun with this. Notably, the water puzzle was decently fun. Uh, I did enjoy the fact that you could catch Pokemon in the fire challenge.
Oh yeah, that was
The
interesting.
double team
I
weather the double team weather combo in the eighth gym puts a very useful strategy in competitive play to use. Now, if only the NPC was tougher, but it's still a great strategy. And freaking God, not the seven. And also, Opal's challenge is a quiz, so you actually have to pay attention.
You actually had to read the lore of the characters
Yeah.
to actually,
Exactly.
you
You
know.
actually have to pay attention.
I think my personal favorite, but that's because I just like this thing. I find it to be fun. I believe the fifth gym leader, the gym leader before
1 second.
before
Fire,
before
fighting.
day. I'm pretty sure the fourth gym leader was fire. No,
No,
third gym leader.
third gym leader is fire. Fourth gym leader is ghost or fighting, depending on your version.
I was thinking
Then the
of
fifth gym leader is Opal. Then the sixth gym leader is God, what was
Ice or Rock.
Yeah, Ice or Rock. Then it was Piers, which Piers is great. I mean, he is fun.
His character is really fun, but
Yeah.
I didn't. So, real quick,
We're nearly passing 2 hours.
I like
so-
Bay's gym challenge. That one was pretty fun.
The top
I
one,
like
yeah.
being able, having to
It's
actually
fun.
make use of your Joy-Cons to actually maneuver around it was really enjoyable.
Yep.
Piers,
But
I hated his gym challenge.
well, it wasn't a gym challenge. It was just them trying to stop
It
you.
wasn't.
It
Here,
wa-
no,
it-
the issue with it, I didn't mind it. It was the fact that there was Mr. Mimes that were blocking your way from some invisible wall. You had to go back and fight more Team Yell,
But at the
which
very
is a
least,
toxic
they're-
fan base, essentially.
But at the very least, their intros are great. The somersault ones, and also the ones that jump from a freaking building. It's like, oh, I twisted my ankle, but at least it was a cool landing, bro. That's fun.
Yeah.
At the very least, it's fun.
That is fun.
And
but
like, you marvel
it-
at their own incompetence.
Well, that's because they were based off of, like I said, they're based off of toxic internet communities or fan bases.
Fan
That's
bases, it's
pretty
fan
much
bases.
what they are. That's
Yeah, but-
all they are.
Yeah, but what do you guys think? What was your guys' favorite generation? What's the worst? Is it 7? There is no other answer. Let us know down in the comments. Until then, this has been Throw the Podcast. Bye.